Picture the strongest being in the entire Norse universe, a literal god of thunder, a guy whose hammer can level mountains and whose entire job description is defend the gods from giants. Now picture him losing a wrestling match to an old woman. That actually happens in Norse mythology, and here's the part that makes it wild. It's the only story in the entire Norse canon where Thor is genuinely, unambiguously beaten. Not loses a little, loses completely, gets set up from the very first minute, and walks away humiliated. So how does the mightiest god in Asgard end up on one knee against someone's grandmother? Stick around, because this story starts weird and just keeps escalating. This all comes from a book called the Prose Edda, specifically a section called Gylfaginning, written down around 1220 by an Icelandic historian named Snorri Sturluson. In the story's own framing, a disguised king named Gylfi is visiting Asgard and asking the gods to explain their mythology to him, and three godly figures called High, Just as High, and Third take turns answering his questions. When Gylfi asks about this particular tale, Third is oddly reluctant to tell it. That's actually a nice little narrative wink, because what follows is basically the one chapter where the gods come off looking foolish. The story kicks off with Thor and Loki heading out on a road trip toward Jotunheim, the land of the giants. Along the way, they stop at a farmer's house for the night, and Thor does what Thor apparently always does when he needs dinner. He kills his own goats, the ones pulling his chariot, cooks them up, and shares the meal with the farmer's family. Here's the part that sounds like it belongs in a fairy tale rulebook. Thor tells everyone not to break the bones, because he's going to resurrect the goats in the morning. Good as new. One kid at the table, the farmer's son Thjalfi, cannot resist cracking open a thigh bone to get at the marrow. Small mistake, big consequences. The next morning, Thor swings his hammer over the goat hides to bring them back to life, and one goat comes back with a permanently lame leg. Thor is furious. As compensation, the farmer hands over his two kids, Thjalfi and his sister Roskva, to serve as Thor's traveling companions from here on out. And just like that, our cast is complete. Now the group presses deeper into Jotunheim, through a forest so massive they can't find anywhere to sleep until nightfall, when they stumble on an enormous building with a door wide enough to walk into without opening. They bed down in a side room. In the middle of the night, the ground starts shaking like an earthquake, loud enough that everyone except Thor is terrified. Thor, naturally, just grips his hammer and waits by the door. Morning comes, the noise stops, and they step outside to figure out what almost squashed them overnight. Turns out the building was a glove. A single glove, belonging to a sleeping giant named Skrimmer, and the earthquake was just him snoring. They'd spent the night in his thumb. Skrimmer wakes up, and here's a fun detail. He already knows Thor's name before anyone says it. He offers to travel together, and because he's enormous, he insists on carrying everyone's food in one big sack slung over his shoulder. That evening, he ties the sack shut and goes to sleep, telling Thor to help himself to supper. Thor, the strongest being in the 9 worlds, tries to undo the knot and simply cannot. Not one knot. Not even a little. If you've ever fought with a stubborn shoelace while everyone watched, you understand exactly how Thor felt in this moment, except his opponent was passed out and snoring. Embarrassed and furious, Thor grabs his hammer and swings it directly into the sleeping giant's skull. Full force. The kind of hit that should end things immediately. Skrimmer stirs, mumbles something about a leaf falling on his head, and goes back to sleep. Thor waits, tries again at midnight, driving the hammer in even harder. Skrimmer wakes up just enough to wonder aloud if an acorn dropped on him. Thor, at this point completely unhinged with frustration, takes one final shot right before dawn, putting everything he has into it. Skrimmer opens one eye, mutters something about birds knocking twigs loose overhead, and casually gets up to start the day like nothing happened. 3 direct hits from the hammer that killed giants and reshaped landscapes in every other Norse story, and this guy is asking about foliage. Skrimmer points them toward a castle called Utgard, warns them to behave themselves once they're inside because the residents won't tolerate arrogance, and then heads off in a different direction. The group arrives at a castle so tall they have to tilt their heads all the way back just to see the top, with a gate too massive to open, so they squeeze through the bars instead. Inside sits the ruler of the place, a giant king named Utgarda-Loki, who informs them that nobody stays under his roof unless they can perform some kind of feat. Loki, never one to stay quiet, immediately volunteers that he can out-eat anyone in the hall. A trencher of meat gets set on the floor, and Loki is paired against a figure named Logi. They eat from opposite ends toward the middle. Loki demolishes his half admirably. Logi eats his meat, his half of the bones, and the wooden trencher itself. Loki loses badly, and if that name sounds suspicious, you're onto something, because Logi is the Old Norse word for wildfire. Next up is Thjalfi, the fastest human traveling with the group, racing a giant named Hugi across a track. First race, Hugi wins comfortably. Second race, he wins by an even bigger margin. Third race, he's finished before Thjalfi is even halfway there. Nobody in the hall needs convincing after that. And once again, the name is doing some quiet foreshadowing, because Hugi is Old Norse for thought. Then it's Thor's turn, and he picks something he's genuinely proud of, drinking. Utgarda-Loki hands him a horn and explains that a good drinker empties it in 1 gulp, an average drinker in 2, and even the weakest giants manage it in 3. Thor takes 3 massive gulps, each one making him more furious, and the horn barely drops. He hands it back defeated. Utgarda-Loki, almost sympathetically, offers him something easier. Just lift the king's pet cat off the floor, something even the smaller giants can do for fun. Thor gets underneath the cat and heaves with everything he's got. The cat arches its back. He manages to get exactly 1 paw off the ground. That's it. That's the whole result. Humiliated 3 times in a row, Thor demands a straight-up fight, strength against strength, no tricks. The giants act almost offended, saying it would be beneath them to wrestle someone who's already shown himself this weak tonight. Instead, Utgarda-Loki calls out his old nursemaid, a woman named Ellie, and suggests Thor wrestle her instead. Picture the room's reaction. Thor, god of thunder, about to grapple somebody's elderly caretaker. Except the harder Thor fights, the more solid and unmovable she becomes, until he's forced down to 1 knee. The strongest being in Asgard, brought low by an old lady in a wrestling match, nobody thought he could possibly lose. The group is given a warm meal and a comfortable place to sleep, and the next morning, as they're leaving, Utgarda-Loki finally comes clean. Every single bit of it, he explains, was illusion from the moment they met him disguised as Skrymir in the forest. The knot on the food sack was reinforced with iron, impossible for anyone to untie. Those 3 hammer blows that felt like they barely landed? They actually struck a nearby mountain range instead of Skrymir's head, and Utgarda-Loki says flatly that the first blow alone would have killed him if it had connected properly. Look at that mountain range today, he says, and you'll find 3 square valleys gouged into the rock, permanent scars from a fight Thor didn't even know he'd won part of. Then come the reveals that recontextualize the entire night. Logi wasn't a big eater. Logi was wildfire itself, which consumes everything, bones and containers included, faster than any living thing possibly could. Hugi wasn't a fast giant. Hugi was thought, and nothing outruns a thought. The drinking horn was secretly connected to the entire ocean, and Thor's 3 gulps actually lowered the sea level, which is apparently why the tides exist. And that cat Thor could barely lift a single paw off the floor? That was Jormungandr, the world serpent that encircles all of Midgard. And when Thor raised even 1 paw, the giants nearly panicked, because what they were actually watching was Thor almost hoisting the cosmic serpent high enough to touch the sky. And Ellie, the frail old woman who beat the strongest god in Norse mythology in a wrestling match? Ellie was old age itself. Utgarda-Loki says it plainly. There is no one, god or otherwise, whom old age cannot eventually bring down. Thor didn't lose to a giant's trick that night. He lost to the one opponent that comes for everyone eventually, disguised as somebody's grandmother. Utgarda-Loki tells Thor it's better for everyone involved if they never cross paths again, and admits that if he'd known Thor's real strength beforehand, he never would have let him through the gate in the first place. Furious at being played this thoroughly, Thor raises his hammer to strike him down on the spot. He swings. There's nothing there. Utgarda-Loki, his castle, and the entire illusion have simply vanished. Now here's the part historians still genuinely argue about. This entire episode survives in basically one place, Snorri Sturluson's writing, put down roughly 2 centuries after Iceland officially converted to Christianity. Snorri was a Christian scholar recording stories from a religion that was no longer practiced the way it once had been. And scholars studying this material, including the Norse mythology researcher John Lindo, have pointed out there's a real question of how much of this specific tale reflects genuine pre-Christian belief versus Snorri's own literary flourishes filling in gaps. Because the pagan Norse simply didn't write extended prose about their own religion while they were still practicing it. There's no independent older text to check this story against. Nobody can say for certain how old the bones of this particular myth really are, or how much shape Snorri gave it centuries later. It's one of those rare cases in mythology where the most famous version of a story might also be its only version. Whatever its true age, the story clearly meant something to the people who told it, because it does something almost no other Norse myth dares to do. It takes the strongest, most reliable hero in the entire pantheon and lets him lose, completely and specifically, to forces no amount of muscle can outfight: fire, thought, the ocean, a serpent that wraps around the world, and time itself. Every other giant in Norse mythology gets flattened by that hammer sooner or later. Old age is the one opponent that never loses, and apparently, even a god has to find that out the hard way, on one knee, in front of a room full of strangers who already knew the punchline.